Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When architect Lucas Kane inherits his grandfather's mountain cabin, he finds peace in the wild until a powerful HOA claims his land as their own. As signs, fences, and threats close in, Lucas must fight to defend his home from a silent, creeping takeover. I never imagined that inheriting a piece of land would feel like inheriting a piece of my soul. My name is Lucas Kane. And 5 years ago, my grandfather left me his mountain property, a sprawling 150-acre slice of wilderness nestled deep in the Rockies, complete with an old hunting cabin that had stood for generations. It wasn't much to look at, a simple timber structure with a stone chimney, weathered shingles, and creaky floorboards that smelled faintly of cedar and old wood smoke. But to me, it was perfect. It was solitude, peace, and a tether to the man who'd taught me how to build, to think, and to dream. As an architect, I spent most of my time surrounded by concrete and steel, immersed in the noise of the city. But here, in the shadow of these towering pines, I found quiet. The cabin sat at the end of a rugged dirt road, far from cell towers and paved streets, perched just above a still pond that mirrored the mountains every sunrise. No neighbors, no traffic, no rules. Just me, the wind, and the occasional rustle of wildlife moving through the trees. I spent the first few summers restoring the place little by little, not to modernize it, but to preserve it. I replaced warped beams, patched the roof, rebuilt the stone fireplace that had cracked from decades of frost and heat. Every nail I hammered felt like a connection to my grandfather. He'd built this place with his own hands after returning from the war, and every inch of it carried his mark. In the evenings, I'd sit on the porch with a glass of bourbon, watching the sun dip behind the peaks, feeling more at home than I ever did in my Chicago apartment. I'd heard whispers about the nearby development, Sierra Heights, a luxury gated community that had sprung up in the last decade a few miles downhill. I didn't pay it much mind. Their neatly manicured lawns and artificial lakes seemed a world apart from the rugged terrain I called home. Every once in a while, I'd catch sight of their signs posted along the lower access road, advertising mountain views and exclusive living. But their boundaries stopped far short of my land, or so I thought. One late afternoon, as I was stacking firewood along the shed wall, I noticed a figure standing near the tree line where my road met the old forest trail. A woman, dressed sharply despite the dust, holding a tablet in one hand and snapping photos with her phone in the other. She hadn't come up the road. She must have hiked up from somewhere else. She stood there for a moment, eyes scanning my cabin like she was sizing it up, then turned and disappeared back into the woods without a word. Something about the way she paused, measuring, calculating, sent a chill up my spine. I brushed it off that night. Maybe she was a hiker, maybe she was just lost, but a nagging thought clung to me as I stirred the fire in the hearth. What would someone from the gated community want with my land? And why now? I poured another drink and told myself not to worry. After all, this cabin, this land, it was mine. No HOA, no outsiders, just me and the mountain. I didn't know then that peace was already slipping through my fingers. A week later, I made my way back up the mountain. Work had been brutal, back-to-back client meetings, endless revisions on a high-rise project, and all I wanted was a quiet weekend away from the city. The minute my truck's tires crunched over the familiar gravel road leading to the cabin, I felt the weight lift off my chest. The air smelled different up here, sharper, cleaner, like the world had forgotten its own noise. But something felt off. When I stepped up onto the porch, I spotted an envelope tucked beneath a rock by the door. It wasn't the usual junk mail the occasional lost courier might leave. No, this one was sealed with an embossed emblem, Sierra Heights Homeowners Association. I frowned. I wasn't part of Sierra Heights. Hell, I wasn't even close to their borders. My property line was well documented, grandfathered in long before their first cookie-cutter mansion sprouted down the hill. I picked up the envelope, slid a thumb beneath the flap, and pulled out the letter inside. It was written in that formal, passive-aggressive corporate tone I knew all too well from dealing with city planners. Dear Mr. Kane, we are pleased to inform you that your property has been identified as part of the Sierra Heights managed area. As such, we extend an invitation for you to join the association, effective immediately. Please provide access keys to your gate and facilities to allow for scheduled maintenance and inspections in accordance with community guidelines. Welcome to the Sierra Heights family. Sincerely, Rachel Bloom, President, Sierra Heights. Show. I read it twice, then a third time. My lips curled into a bewildered grin as I leaned against the porch rail. Identified as part of... What the hell did that even mean? My land wasn't theirs. My family had owned this property for nearly a century, with deeds, surveys, and filings to prove it. I wasn't part of any association, certainly not a suburban enclave that sold mountain living with manicured lawns and mandatory Christmas lights. I shook my head and set the letter on the porch table, pushing it aside like an absurd joke. Maybe it was a clerical error. Maybe some overeager administrator had drawn their boundary line too wide. I poured myself a glass of water and tried to forget about it. But the unease lingered. That woman I'd seen taking photos last week, could she have been Rachel Bloom? It wasn't exactly casual hiker attire she'd been wearing. And what were they doing up this far anyway? I spent the next few hours working on the cabin's roof, replacing a few shingles that winter storms had dislodged, but every time I glanced toward the tree line, I felt watched. Nothing stirred, though, except the trees swaying in the late afternoon breeze. As the sun dipped below the ridgeline, I walked back inside and tossed the letter onto the old oak dining table next to a pile of tools. I wasn't going to dignify it with a response. Let them figure out their own paperwork mess. This was my land. They had no claim here, no power here. At least, that's what I thought. I didn't know then that the letter wasn't an invitation. It was a warning. The next letter came a week later. This time, it wasn't left gently under a rock. It was taped to my cabin's door in bold red ink, the words "Final Notice" stamped across the top like some bureaucratic death sentence. I tore it free and unfolded it right there on the porch, heart pounding with a mix of annoyance and disbelief. Mr. Kane, this is your final opportunity to comply with Sierra Heights Homeowners Association regulations. Failure to submit membership documents and grant property access within 7 days will constitute a violation of community rules, resulting in applicable fines and enforcement measures. You are hereby notified of an initial fine of $500 per day for noncompliance. Sincerely, Rachel Bloom, President, Sierra Heights HOA. My jaw clenched as I read the letter aloud, the words sounding even more ridiculous, spoken into the crisp mountain air. A $500 daily fine. Enforcement measures for land they didn't own, couldn't possibly claim. My fingers crumpled the paper involuntarily before I forced myself to flatten it out again, taking a deep breath. Unbelievable, I muttered, pacing the porch. They're serious. I sat down at the old picnic table, pulling out my laptop and hotspot. Even though reception up here was spotty, I managed to connect long enough to pull up county records again. The deed was clear. The boundary maps were unchanged. There was no encroachment, no annexation, nothing. Yet here they were, acting like I was already under their thumb. I dialed the number at the bottom of the letter, waiting through a tinny-holed music loop until a woman's voice picked up. Sierra Heights HOA office, how may I assist you? I need to speak with Rachel Bloom, I said curtly. One moment. A few clicks later, Rachel's voice came through the line, pleasant, professional, with a thin veneer of forced politeness. Mr. Kane, I hoped you'd call. Have you received our correspondence? Oh, I received it, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. But I think there's been a mistake. I'm not part of Sierra Heights. My land is privately owned. It's never been under HOA jurisdiction. There was a pause. Then, Lucas, I understand why you're confused, but according to our internal maps, your parcel falls within the Sierra Heights Managed Zone. It's been designated as shared recreational space for the community. I assure you, this is standard practice for developments expanding into adjacent land. My stomach twisted. Designated by who? Not me. I've never sold, leased, or given permission for anything. You're over the line. She chuckled softly, the sound sending a cold spike down my spine. Boundaries are fluid up here, Lucas. The community needs access to natural spaces. I'm just trying to include you in something bigger. Don't fight it. It'll be easier if you cooperate. I gripped the phone tighter. I'm not interested. You have no authority here. If you, or anyone from your association, sets foot on my land again without permission, I'll call the sheriff. That's my final word. Another pause. Longer this time. Then, the sweetness dropped from her voice like a mask falling away. That's unfortunate, Mr. Kane. We were hoping for your cooperation, but if you choose to be difficult, we do have other options. She hung up before I could respond. I stared at the phone, feeling a chill creep through my chest, despite the warmth of the afternoon sun. For the first time, I felt the weight of something deeper than a clerical mistake. This wasn't about paperwork. This was a play, a quiet, calculated move to muscle me out. As the breeze stirred the trees, I caught sight of something new down by the main road, a sign staked into the ground, gleaming white against the grass. HOA Common Recreational Area, members only. It stood right at the entrance to my property. I didn't sleep much that night. I sat at the dining table with the crumpled letters spread out like a losing hand of cards, staring at the words until they blurred into nothing. Every muscle in my body itched with frustration. This wasn't just a mistake. Rachel Bloom and her HOA were playing a long game, one that relied on pressure, intimidation, and paperwork to bleed me dry or make me walk away. But they didn't know me. I wasn't leaving. Not now. Not ever. The next morning, I made a call to an old college friend, Laura Matthews, a real estate attorney who'd built a reputation in Colorado for handling messy land disputes. We hadn't talked in a couple of years, but the moment I explained the situation, she cut me off mid-sentence. "They're trying to force an annexation by paperwork," she said flatly. "Seen it before. Developers do this when they want a parcel that doesn't belong to them. They can't legally take it, so they drown the owner in claims, fake violations, fines. They hope you either sell or give up fighting." I exhaled slowly. "Well, I'm not selling." "That's good," she said, "because this is going to be ugly." By noon, Laura had pulled the county property records, deeds, and plat maps. Everything was clear. My land was privately owned, never zoned into Sierra Heights, never subject to HOA covenants. Yet, there, buried in recent filings, she found a disturbing note, an application filed 2 months ago by the Sierra Heights HOA, requesting an adjustment to their community boundary to include adjacent open space parcels for managed recreational use. My parcel. "They're laying groundwork to claim your property as common area," Laura explained. "It hasn't been approved, but they're acting like it has." I felt my pulse pounding in my temples. "Is that even legal?" "Not unless you agreed." "Which you didn't," she clicked her tongue. "But if they file enough false reports, send inspectors, post signs, they're creating a false narrative of control. It confuses authorities. Makes it look like a shared space." She paused, her voice darkening. "They're also advertising your cabin as part of their community amenities on their website." That last sentence made me go cold. I pulled up their website on my laptop. Sure enough, right there under coming attractions was a glossy rendering of a rustic mountain cabin, my cabin unmistakably mine, labeled Community Lodge, opening soon. My hands balled into fists. They're already selling it. Not yet, but they're promising it, which means they've probably got investors or buyers lined up expecting access. Laura sighed. "We need to move fast. I'm filing an injunction to stop any trespassing or claims of access. In the meantime, document everything, photos, videos, every sign they post, every encounter." That afternoon, I walked the perimeter of my land. Signs had multiplied overnight. Members only trail, HOA picnic area, future community fire pit. Some were nailed right onto my trees. I tore them down, taking photos first, feeling rage twist in my chest with every rip. Near the bottom of the drive, a new addition waited. A metal gate bolted across my road, chained shut, with an HOA seal welded onto the front. And beside it, seated in a folding chair under a pop-up canopy, was the same security guard from last time, flipping through a magazine like he had all the time in the world. I stopped the truck a few yards back, climbed out, and stalked toward him. "You're trespassing." The guard looked up lazily, chewing gum. "HOA's got authority here, sir. You'll need a community access pass." I took a step closer. "Move that gate, or I call the sheriff." He smirked. "Go ahead." I stared him down, heart pounding, before pulling out my phone and dialing. "Yeah, sheriff's office. I've got an illegal barricade blocking my property access, and unauthorized personnel refusing to leave." As I gave them the details, the guard's smile faded. "Your boss doesn't own this land," I said quietly as I hung up, "and you're sitting on the wrong side of the law." He stood, folding his chair. "We'll see about that." I watched him walk down the road, vanishing around the bend, leaving the gate behind. I knew it wouldn't be the last time I saw him, and I knew Rachel Bloom wasn't finished, but neither was I. The sheriff's deputy arrived about an hour later, a tall guy named Rodriguez, who looked like he'd seen this kind of neighborhood nonsense before. I met him at the gate, showing him the chain and the HOA logo welded right onto the metal. He scratched his chin. "That's bold. Real bold." "They're claiming they own this road," I said flatly. "But it's mine. Goes straight through my deeded land." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "You got paperwork?" "I've got everything." I handed him the folder Laura had helped me assemble, the deed, the plat map, the original survey, even a notarized affidavit from the county recorder confirming my parcel's independence from any HOA. Boundaries. He flipped through it carefully, whistling under his breath. "Well, their claim's garbage, but they're trying to establish presence. You notice they filed anything official with the county?" "Laura found an application to annex my land," I told him. "Not approved, but they're acting like it's already theirs." Rodriguez shook his head. "You need to take this to court, man. This is the kind of stunt that gets uglier before it gets better." "I've got an injunction filing in process," I said. "But meanwhile, they've blocked me out of my own damn cabin." He gave the gate a tug. "You want me to cut this chain?" "Please." 5 minutes later, with the help of a bolt cutter from his cruiser, the chain clattered to the dirt, and the gate swung open. I rolled my truck through, heart hammering, the first breath of relief mixing with dread. I knew it wasn't over. If anything, this was their opening move, and now I'd officially pushed back. When I reached the cabin, I saw more signs staked into the ground around the yard. Future HOA recreation site, planned picnic pavilion, reserved for community use. Some even had fake lot numbers printed on them, as if they'd already subdivided. My land on paper. It made my skin crawl. I tore them down one by one, snapping photos before ripping each post from the ground and stacking them in a pile by the porch. Then I checked the shed. My gut sank. The padlock had been snapped clean off. Inside, the shelves were half empty. My chainsaw, generator, several toolboxes, gone. Only a few rusted garden tools remained, scattered across the floor like an insult. I clenched my fists, feeling heat rise up my neck. They'd crossed a line. Posting fake signs was one thing. Stealing my tools? That was another level. I turned and looked across the clearing toward the tree line. For a second, I thought I saw someone standing between the pines, just a flicker of movement before it vanished deeper into the woods. I took a slow breath, forcing the anger down. I wasn't going to let them bait me into a mistake. That evening, I installed new locks on every door. I checked the trail cams I'd set up last month. One had been smashed. The others had nothing but blurry shapes, headlights in the distance. I made notes, filed a police report for the theft, and sent everything to Laura. At midnight, I sat on the porch with a shotgun resting across my lap, watching the shadows shift under moonlight. Somewhere far off, an engine rumbled and faded. Somewhere closer, an owl hooted. Then my phone buzzed, a text from Laura. They filed a new petition with forged neighbor signatures, trying to prove community consent. I stared at the screen, my chest tight. The words blurred, turning into something colder, heavier. Rachel Bloom wasn't just playing a game. She was making her move. Morning came cold and brittle, sunlight slicing through the cabin windows like sharp blades. I stepped outside with a mug of coffee and stopped dead in my tracks. They'd been here again. The trail up from the lower access road was lined with fresh markers, bright orange flags hammered into the dirt every 10 feet, each bearing the HOA logo in black ink. They snaked up the hill, across my driveway, around the pond, and deep into the trees behind the cabin, like some absurd boundary ritual. My stomach twisted. I followed them down toward the pond, boots crunching over frost-bitten grass, until I found something worse. A row of wooden stakes planted along the shoreline, ropes tied between them, and a battered sign that read, "Future HOA Boating Dock." My pond. My private pond. They weren't just staking claims, they were mapping it out, like they'd already decided it was theirs. I took photos, my hands trembling not from the cold, but from the surge of frustration roaring through me. Then I turned toward the old storage shed and felt my chest sink. The new lock I'd installed just days ago hung twisted and broken. The door hung open on its hinges. Inside, more things were missing. My camping gear, fuel cans, even the old canoe my grandfather had patched a dozen times over the years. Gone. I swallowed hard, snapping more photos, documenting every detail. They'd come back, again and again, chipping away at me, erasing my presence inch by inch. Back at the cabin, I pulled out my phone and called Laura. "They're escalating," I said as soon as she picked up. "They've marked the land. They're claiming the pond now. They broke into the shed again. Tools are gone. The lock was cut." I heard her curse under her breath. "Lucas, listen to me. We need that injunction granted ASAP. I've pushed the court for an emergency hearing, but the judge's calendar's tight. This is getting out of hand." "I know." I rubbed my temple. "They're making it look like they're already in control." "They're building a record," Laura warned. "In case it gets in front of a sympathetic official or judge, they want to show established use. Every marker, every sign, it's part of the strategy. You need to film it all, every encounter." As if on cue, I spotted movement by the entrance road. A small group of people was walking up the drive, 4 of them, all wearing matching HOA vests. One carried a clipboard, another held a measuring wheel, a third trailed behind with a handheld GPS unit. They stopped near the gate, then started toward the cabin like they belonged here. I felt my pulse spike. I grabbed my phone, flipped on video, and walked down the driveway to intercept them. "You're trespassing," I called out sharply. "You're not allowed here." The man with the clipboard raised a hand. "Sir, we're just performing a community compliance survey, standard procedure for shared use zones." "This isn't a shared use zone," I snapped. "This is private land. You have no authority here." "According to our maps," the clipboard man replied coolly, "this area is designated as community accessible under Sierra Heights HOA jurisdiction. We're here to ensure proper compliance with community codes." I stepped closer. "Take one more step onto this property, and I'm calling the sheriff." The group hesitated, exchanging glances. Then one of them, a tall guy with a smug grin, spoke up. "You're going to have to get used to it, Mr. Kane. This is shared land now. You're the one out of compliance." I raised my phone higher, making sure their faces were on camera. "Get off my land. Now." They lingered another beat before finally turning back down the road, muttering to each other. I watched until they vanished past the gate, then sagged against a tree, my hands still shaking. They weren't bluffing anymore. They were laying siege. And I was standing alone on the front lines. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the cabin, every snap of a branch outside had me sitting upright, hand instinctively reaching for the shotgun propped by the door. I kept replaying the day over and over. Those smug faces, the fake authority, the endless signs littering my land like claims planted by invaders. By morning, I was done waiting. Laura called just after sunrise, her voice tight and exhausted. "Lucas, I've got news. The judge approved the injunction, temporary restraining order against any HOA personnel or agents entering your property. It's filed as of today." Relief flooded me for a fleeting second. That's something. "But it won't stop them completely," she added. "Not unless they're served properly, and I guarantee Rachel already knows. She's going to double down." She wasn't wrong. Mid-morning, I received a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Lucas," Rachel Bloom's syrupy tone oozed through the line. "I heard you filed some legal paperwork. How disappointing. We could have worked this out quietly. You've broken into my shed. You've stolen from me. You've posted fake signs and blocked my road. Quiet's not an option anymore," I snapped. "You misunderstand," she said softly. "We're not taking anything. We're reclaiming what was always meant for the community. You're the one squatting on common land." I almost laughed. "You think I'm going to roll over because you printed fake maps?" "I don't need you to roll over," she replied calmly. "I just need you to run out of patience." And with that, she hung up. I stared at the phone, then threw it across the room, watching it skid across the floorboards. My chest burned, not with fear, but fury. By noon, Laura texted again. "We got a tip. Someone from inside the HOA wants to talk. Former board member, willing to go on record." I jumped at the chance. That afternoon, I met Laura in town at a small diner where a wiry man in his 60s waited in a corner booth, nervously stirring coffee. "Name's Doug," he introduced himself quietly. "Served on the HOA board for 5 years. Got pushed out last year when Rachel took over." His eyes darted around as if expecting Rachel herself to materialize from the kitchen. "She's been planning this for a while," Doug said, leaning in. "That parcel of yours? It's the last undeveloped piece near Sierra Heights. The developer who funds half the board, he's been after it for years. Rachel promised she'd find a way to fold it in. She's the one who ordered the fake boundary map. Had it drawn up by a surveyor buddy who owed her a favor. I felt my fists clenching under the table. She's been telling residents it's already part of the community, that she's negotiating access with some absentee owner. They've been marketing your cabin as a future lodge in brochures. Laura's jaw tightened beside me. Can you testify to this? Doug hesitated, then gave a grim nod. Yeah, I'll swear it under oath. I've got emails, meeting notes. She's been overreaching for years, but this crosses the line. I thanked him, heart pounding with something that felt dangerously close to hope. But when I returned to the cabin that evening, any sense of victory evaporated. The cameras I'd replaced just 2 days ago? Smashed. A fresh sign nailed to the front door. Community Lodge renovation, authorized personnel only. And spray painted across the side of the cabin in bold red letters, "This land is ours." I stood there, breathless, staring at those words glowing. In the last light of dusk, this wasn't intimidation anymore. This was war. The courthouse felt colder than the mountain wind. I sat at the plaintiff's table, Laura beside me, a stack of binders and exhibits laid out in meticulous rows. Across the aisle, Rachel Bloom perched at the defense table in a crisp ivory suit, lips pressed into a tight, confident smile. Her lawyer, a sharp-featured man in an expensive suit, shuffled papers, already smirking like he'd won. But he hadn't seen what we'd brought. The judge entered, his robe flowing, gavel-cracking order into the room. "Proceed," he said, settling behind the bench. Laura stood first. "Your Honor, we intend to prove that Sierra Heights HOA, under the direction of Rachel Bloom, engaged in a deliberate, coordinated campaign to illegally annex Mr. Kane's private property through fraudulent documentation, harassment, trespassing, vandalism, and misrepresentation." Rachel's attorney rose. "We reject that characterization. The HOA operated under the belief that the parcel was under community management due to long-standing understandings predating Mr. Kane's ownership." I almost laughed. Long-standing understandings? My family had owned this land for almost a century. The first day moved fast. Laura introduced the deed, the official boundary maps, the notarized filings. The judge nodded through each exhibit, eyebrows rising as Laura laid out the unbroken paper trail of my ownership. Then came the surveillance footage. On the big screen, grainy video played from the few trail cams that hadn't been smashed. HOA volunteers hammering signs into my ground, sneaking up the driveway at dawn with measuring wheels, planting flag markers while looking over their shoulders. The judge leaned forward, his expression darkening. Then Laura called Doug to the stand. He shifted nervously under oath, but spoke clear. Rachel directed the boundary map to be redrawn without legal authority. She told the board it'd be absorbed quietly. I have emails showing her instructing volunteers to establish presence on the Kane property to justify community access. Rachel's lawyer objected. Hearsay. Laura slid a printout onto the evidence table. "Emails, Your Honor, directly from Ms. Bloom." The judge read silently, his jaw tightening. "Overruled," he said. Rachel's composure cracked for the first time. Her hands clenched in her lap. Her eyes darted between her lawyer and the judge. Then it was my turn. I stood, sworn in, then took the stand. Laura asked simple, clear questions. How long I'd owned the land, how I'd discovered the signs, the barricades, the vandalism. I described finding the spray-painted message across my cabin. I told them about the missing tools, the broken cameras, the security guard who tried to block my own driveway. When Rachel's lawyer cross-examined, he tried a new angle. "Mr. Kane, would you describe yourself as anti-community, resistant to cooperative living?" I frowned. "No, I just don't want strangers taking what isn't theirs." He tapped his pen thoughtfully. "But wouldn't it benefit you and the surrounding area if this parcel were accessible to all residents? Trails, picnic spots, shared natural space." "My grandfather didn't work this land, so it could be a picnic spot for HOA brunches," I shot back. "This land isn't theirs to share. It's mine." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Rachel's lawyer sat down defeated. Laura stood again. "No further questions." The judge's gaze swept across the room. "I've heard enough. I'll deliver my ruling tomorrow morning." As we packed up, Rachel glared across the aisle, her confident smile gone. She mouthed something under her breath I couldn't quite catch, but I didn't need to. I'd seen it in her eyes. She knew she'd lost. The next morning, the courthouse buzzed with whispers long before the judge took the bench. I sat quietly at the plaintiff's table, hands folded, feeling every heartbeat like a drum inside my chest. Laura leaned over and whispered, "He's going to side with us. He has no legal ground to stand on with their case. But still, until the words came from the judge's mouth, nothing felt certain. Rachel sat across from me, posture stiff, lips pressed so tight they'd almost disappeared. Her lawyer looked worn, his tie loosened, bags under his eyes betraying a night spent crafting a defense he knew wouldn't hold. The judge cleared his throat, flipping through his notes one last time before fixing us with a stern gaze. In reviewing the evidence presented, he began, voice steady, deliberate. It is abundantly clear that the property in question, parcel 428B as described in the county records, is privately owned by Mr. Lucas Kane. This ownership predates the formation of Sierra Heights HOA and was never at any point incorporated into its jurisdiction. Rachel's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Furthermore, the judge continued, tone sharpening. The court finds substantial evidence of willful misconduct by the HOA, including trespassing, harassment, unauthorized signage placement, unauthorized installation of barriers, and misrepresentation of ownership. He paused, letting the silence stretch like a blade hanging midair. Ms. Bloom, as president of the Sierra Heights HOA, you personally authorized actions that amounted to a deliberate attempt to dispossess Mr. Kane of his rightful property. This court views such actions as not only egregious but bordering on criminal. Rachel's mouth parted in stunned disbelief. Accordingly, the judge said, voice rising, this court grants a permanent injunction barring Sierra Heights HOA, its officers, agents, and representatives from entering or interfering with Mr. Kane's property in any way. Additionally, the court awards damages in the amount of $750,000 to Mr. Kane, covering legal expenses, restoration costs, security upgrades, and punitive damages for the sustained harassment and vandalism. I exhaled sharply, my shoulders sinking under the sudden weight of relief. The judge's gavel slammed down. This court is adjourned. Rachel shot up from her chair. Your Honor, with respect. He held up a hand, silencing her mid-sentence. Ms. Bloom, you are advised to seek legal counsel. The district attorney's office will be reviewing the evidence submitted for potential criminal charges related to document forgery and fraud. Her face drained of color. Laura grinned beside me. Told you, she murmured. Reporters swarmed the steps outside as we exited the courthouse. Microphones thrust toward me, cameras flashing, questions overlapping like gunfire. Mr. Kane, how do you feel about the verdict? Any comment on the allegations against Rachel Bloom? Will you press additional charges? I shielded my eyes from the glare. I just want to go home, I said simply, walking past them, Laura at my side. Behind me, I heard Rachel arguing with a reporter, her voice brittle and frantic. Later that afternoon, the local news aired the story. Sierra Heights HOA loses land dispute in court. President faces criminal probe. Her photo flashed across the screen. That same ivory suit now wrinkled, her expression hollow. That night, back at the cabin, I stood on the porch and watched the sun bleed over the ridgeline. The signs were gone. The flags were gone. The gate had been removed by a county order earlier that day. For the first time in months, the land felt mine again, quiet, untouched, and still. Laura called one last time before turning in. You're in the clear, Lucas and Rachel. She won't be running an HOA again anytime soon. I thanked her, then hung up, breathing deep the cold mountain air. For the first time in what felt like forever, the mountain answered back with nothing but silence, and it was beautiful. A month passed before I allowed myself to truly relax. Even with the court's ruling, even with the county crews dismantling every illegal sign, barrier, and post the HOA had driven into my land, some part of me kept waiting for the next shoe to drop. But the days rolled by in quiet, steady peace. No more trespassers, no more smug faces in HOA vests, no more late-night phone calls or veiled threats. It was over, and the mountain had never felt more like home. That first weekend back, I decided to make it official. I invited Laura, Doug, and a few close friends up for a celebration. By late afternoon, the cabin buzzed with laughter, the crackling of a bonfire, and the clink of beer bottles. The smell of grilled burgers mingled with pine and wood smoke as we sat around the fire pit, swapping stories, Doug recounting HOA meetings that now felt absurd in hindsight. Never thought I'd see the day Rachel Bloom ate crow, Doug chuckled, poking at the embers. She's got half the community demanding her head. Laura sipped her drink beside me, her boots propped on a log. Last I heard, the district attorney's filing fraud charges next week. She'll be busy defending herself for a while. I shook my head with a wry smile. She underestimated how stubborn I could be. "That's an understatement," Laura said, raising her glass in a mock toast to stubborn men and their mountains. I clinked my glass against hers, letting the warmth of the fire seep into my bones. Later, after the last guest had left and the fire burned low, I walked the perimeter of the property, flashlight beams sweeping over the familiar paths. The flags were gone. The stakes were gone. The spray paint had been power washed from the cabin walls, though faint scars remained, ghosts of the fight. I stopped by the pond's edge, watching moonlight ripple across its glassy surface. Somewhere out in the dark, an owl called. I closed my eyes listening. It was quiet, really quiet, and in that silence, I felt something settle inside me, a kind of closure, deeper than any court ruling could grant. When I made my way back to the cabin, I paused at the front gate and mounted a new sign I'd ordered, bolting it into the freshly repaired post. "Private property. Welcome, friends." Simple, clear, no threats, no warnings. Just a message for the people who mattered. Inside, I poured myself a last glass of bourbon, took it out onto the porch, and sank into the old rocking chair my grandfather once used. The stars stretched wide and endless overhead, more vivid here than anywhere else I'd ever lived. I took a long sip, feeling the mountain air settle around me like an old blanket. And as I watched the last coals fade into ash, I smiled softly to myself. "Sometimes," I murmured, the words carried off into the night, "to protect what matters, you have to be the wolf." The cabin stood quiet, the land stretching wild and free around it, and at last I was at peace.